The night felt heavier than usual as I stepped into the grand dining room of my childhood. The walls, lined with family portraits and military accolades, seemed to watch me, reminding me of the life I had left behind. My father's 60th birthday was supposed to be a celebration, but the tension in the air was palpable. I could sense the undercurrents before anyone spoke a word. Mila, my older sister by 2 years, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her laugh had the faint edge of desperation. Years of reckless choices had finally caught up with her. Gambling losses, failed investments, and mounting bills totaling $800,000. Yet, she carried herself like nothing had changed, the same entitled confidence I'd grown up resenting. Richard, my father, stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid, the kind of authority that brooked no defiance. The man who had drilled discipline into every corner of our lives now had his eyes locked on me with a weight I couldn't ignore. "Lara," he said, voice low but unmistakably commanding, "you'll pay your sister's debt or you're no longer part of this family." The words hit me, but not in the way he intended. I felt no fear, no guilt. Years of striving to build my independence, to carve out a life on my own terms, had prepared me for this exact moment. I could see the shock ripple across the table, the tension twisting the lines of their faces. Mila's lips parted in disbelief, her eyes wide and calculating, like she was expecting me to crumble. Richard's jaw tightened, a physical manifestation of the disappointment he tried to mask. I smiled. It was quiet, subtle, but it carried everything I wanted to say. That I wouldn't bend, that I wasn't afraid, that no amount of family obligation or guilt could chain me to their recklessness. The clinking of silverware and the murmur of distant voices faded into the background as I stood, my chair scraping softly against the polished floor. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. The cool night air outside was a welcome contrast to the stifling weight inside. Every step felt like a reclamation of my own life, a shedding of expectations I never agreed to. I left behind more than just a room full of familiar faces. I left behind the life I had known, the inheritance, and the history that had shaped me, but no longer defined me. As I drove away from the house, the city lights of Portland fading in the distance, I realized that true independence was never about money or comfort. It was about choice, about standing firm when others demand submission. I didn't know what awaited me beyond the familiar roads, but I knew one thing for certain: I had chosen myself. And in that moment, I smiled again, not with triumph, not with malice, but with quiet certainty. I had disappeared from their world, yet for the first time, I had truly arrived in my own. It started as a dull, nagging worry when I checked my accounts one quiet morning. At first, I thought it was a bank error, a misplaced transaction or temporary hold. But as I scrolled through the numbers, my stomach sank. Every account I owned, every hard-earned dollar I had saved was gone. Confusion quickly turned into disbelief. Statements I had meticulously managed showed sudden withdrawals I hadn't authorized. My mortgage was unpaid, my car loan vanished, and my savings were wiped clean. It felt impossible, like someone had reached into my life and plucked everything I'd built from beneath me. The truth hit hard. The Quinn family business, the same one I had refused to use as a lifeline for Mila, had secretly merged my name into a new contract without my permission. The legal papers were signed, stamped, and filed, all without my knowledge. It wasn't just a clever scheme. It was a calculated move to seize control of my assets. And then the pieces fell into place. Mila's signature, once so carefully forged on documents I would never have agreed to, lined the pages of my own undoing. My father, Richard, had known. He had seen it happen and done nothing. The man who once demanded loyalty now stood aside, letting their plan succeed. The weight of betrayal was suffocating. It wasn't just money. It was trust, family, and the sense of security I had spent years cultivating. The home I had designed with care now belonged to someone else. My car, my office, my bank accounts, all vanished. I had nothing tangible left to hold on to, and for a moment, the world seemed stripped bare. Emotionally shattered, I realized that Portland, the city I had built my life in, no longer had a place for me. Every street, every familiar corner, reminded me of their treachery. I left quietly, slipping out of the city that had witnessed both my ambition and my downfall. No calls, no explanations, no confrontation, just a silent exit, leaving my old life behind. Yet beneath the shock and despair, a new resolve began to take root. I swore I wouldn't react rashly, wouldn't seek immediate revenge. Not yet. Instead, I promised myself something far more potent: patience. I would observe, plan, and prepare. I would return, not in desperation or anger, but armed with knowledge, strategy, and an unshakable focus. The world I had known, the family I once trusted, had tried to break me. And in that attempt, they had only fueled a determination that burned brighter than. I carried nothing but a new sense of purpose, a quiet intensity that would guide my next steps. I disappeared that day, but it wasn't surrender. It was preparation. I would return smarter, colder, and ready. The Quinns had taken everything, or so they thought. And somewhere deep inside, a plan began to form. Denver was unfamiliar at first, a city of clean lines and distant mountains, but it offered anonymity I desperately needed. Under the name Elise Hart, I started over, leaving Portland, my past, and the Quinns behind. Every detail of this new life was deliberate, a carefully constructed identity with no ties to the woman I had once been. I founded a small architecture firm, modest at the beginning, but built on precision, vision, and a quiet determination. Each project became a stepping stone. Small offices grew into commercial renovations, modest homes into sleek modern residences. Slowly, influential clients noticed, drawn not only to the designs but to the efficiency and discretion I offered. Denver became a canvas for both my work and my reinvention. While I focused on growth, my mind never strayed far from the betrayal that had forced me to flee. I discovered the architect of my ruin wasn't only my family. Clayton Rhodes, a man I had trusted by association, my father's longtime friend and lawyer, had orchestrated the documents that drained me. He had exploited his knowledge of contracts, signatures, and loopholes to weaponize the law against me. Realizing this shifted my focus. My fight wasn't just against my family anymore. It extended to the network of corruption that had facilitated it. I began to observe patiently and strategically. People connected to Rhodes, colleagues, former clients, even casual acquaintances, became part of my silent investigation. I wore a mask of naivety, appearing inexperienced, approachable, even harmless. Behind the facade, I collected information, noted inconsistencies, traced connections, and quietly documented evidence that would one day serve as leverage. Every encounter reinforced a truth I embraced. Power could be subtle, invisible, and patient. While others flaunted wealth, authority, or fear, I cultivated precision, knowledge, and timing. My motto emerged naturally. They took my money. I'll take their peace. It wasn't revenge for immediate satisfaction. It was a commitment to eventual justice. Years passed quietly. My firm expanded steadily, reputation solidifying without ever drawing attention to my true identity. I refined my skills, built networks of trustworthy allies, and most importantly, stayed invisible to the people who had wronged me. Each successful project added credibility to Elise Hart, and each day added to the foundation of the plan that was quietly formed. Even in solitude, I felt the sharp satisfaction of control. My anger, once raw and reactive, had transformed into clarity. Every strategy, every alliance, every note I took was a brick in the structure I was building. A structure designed not only to reclaim what was mine, but to ensure the people who had destroyed me would feel the weight of their choices. Denver became more than a refuge. It became a proving ground. I was no longer the vulnerable daughter or sister. I was Elise Hart, observant, meticulous, and untouchable. The quiet years were not years of hiding. They were years of becoming unstoppable, preparing for the moment when the balance would shift. And it would. 5 years had passed since I vanished from Oregon, yet the memory of betrayal remained sharp, like a scar that refused to fade. Returning wasn't about nostalgia. It was about presence, observation, and timing. I arrived quietly, without announcements or reminders, my identity concealed beneath the polished guise of a potential investor. The name on my business card, unfamiliar and authoritative, carried weight that masked the woman they once thought powerless. The Quinn family had changed. Mila, once extravagant and untouchable, now bore the consequences of her recklessness. Divorce had stripped her of appearances, mounting debt left her anxious, and desperation shadowed every movement. She moved through the gathering with forced smiles, grasping at influence she no longer had. It was a painful elegance, a performance I watched with measured detachment. Richard, my father, had endured years of prideful stubbornness, yet even he could not escape the effects of age and poor health. His posture remained rigid, his gaze steady, but faint tremors betrayed the body beneath the discipline. Pride alone could not disguise fragility, and though he still commanded attention, there was a vulnerability I had never seen before. It was a rare opportunity to observe the weight of choices, the toll of time and misjudgment, without interference. The gathering itself was lively, a veneer of celebration covering undercurrents of tension and exhaustion. Conversations fluttered across the room, punctuated by laughter that never quite reached the eyes. I stood apart, quietly taking note, blending in seamlessly. No one suspected the truth, that the woman they knew as Laura Quinn had returned, not in anger, but in quiet calculation. Every gesture, every exchange was catalogued and analyzed. As I moved through the room, I noticed how easily influence had shifted. Friends and acquaintances that once catered to Mila's whims now measured their words, cautious of appearances and uncertain authority. It was a subtle imbalance, yet significant, a testament to the consequences of carelessness and the erosion of power over time. I remained invisible, detached, yet quietly amused. Their desperation was not my delight, nor was it a thrill. It was information, insight, the foundation for what was to come. Observation had always been a tool, and now it was in full use. I could see the cracks in their confidence, the anxious glances, the unspoken tension that hung in the air like a fragile chandelier. As the evening drew on, I stepped back, allowing the room to continue its performance. My presence was unnoticed, yet the impact of my return rippled quietly through the space. Every interaction, every glance, was a thread in the web I was weaving. The Quinns believed their world was intact, that life had carried on despite past conflicts. They had no inkling that the ghost of their past, the daughter and sister they underestimated, was now an architect of influence far beyond their comprehension. For the first time, I felt the satisfaction of distance paired with proximity. I was here, yet untouchable. I was observing, yet preparing. The past and present collided quietly, and in that collision, a plan continued to crystallize, precise, inevitable, and unstoppable. Richard welcomed me with the same courtesy he extended to anyone who carried influence or capital. Under the guise of Elise Hart, I presented my firm as an opportunity, a partner capable of rescuing struggling ventures. I spoke in measured tones, my words precise, layered with the confidence of someone who had built a reputation from nothing. He listened attentively, unaware of the identity lurking beneath the polished exterior. Mila hovered nearby, her eagerness barely concealed. She painted the project as a lifeline, emphasizing growth, recovery, and the chance to reclaim status. Her voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation, the kind that makes people willing to overlook caution. Richard, despite his instincts, was swayed by the allure of security, the promise of turning losses into gains. I guided every discussion carefully, presenting blueprints, forecasts, and contracts that seemed routine, essential even. Each document was layered with clauses designed to secure my position, but they appeared harmless, technical, and necessary. Mila's enthusiasm added a convincing layer of legitimacy. Her insistence made the agreements feel urgent, unavoidable. Richard's trust grew with every nod, every handshake, every careful phrase I delivered. It was remarkable how easily influence could be engineered when people acted out of desire and fear simultaneously. Mila wanted redemption, Richard wanted stability, and both were blind to the invisible thread connecting every signature to me. They believed they were driving the process, negotiating for survival, while in reality, they were following a path I had meticulously mapped. Each meeting, each presentation, reinforced the illusion of partnership. I was precise, careful, never pushing too hard, always allowing them to feel in control. The more they believed they were steering the project, the more thoroughly I secured the foundation for what was to come. I was a guide, not a threat, invisible, indispensable, untouchable. By the final evening, the documents were complete. Mila's excitement was tangible, Richard's confidence solid. Every page carried the weight of agreement, every signature sealed the arrangement. They read, signed, and approved without hesitation, believing they were securing their legacy and financial stability. In truth, each mark transferred ownership, control, and authority into my hands. The moment the last signature touched the paper, the trap was set. There was no confrontation, no dramatic reveal, no immediate fallout. The process had been invisible, seamless, and complete. They believed they had negotiated a lifeline, but it was the final step in a plan they could not yet perceive. As I gathered the papers, I felt no rush, no triumphant thrill. The precision of timing, the subtlety of execution, and the inevitability of what followed were far more satisfying than spectacle. Mila's persistence, Richard's trust, and their combined desperation had made the work effortless. All that remained was to wait, allowing the legal framework to crystallize into absolute control. I left the office that evening quietly, my expression neutral, my mind calm. The Quinns had acted exactly as expected, and the world they had tried to protect now rested in the hands of someone they never suspected. The stage was prepared, the pieces aligned, and the moment of reckoning had begun, all without a single word revealing the truth. The evening arrived with a weight that made the air feel thicker. Candles flickered across the polished dining table where Richard and Mila sat. Documents spread before them like the map of a fate they did not fully understand. Outside, the sky had darkened, clouds heavy with the promise of rain, matching the tension inside. Mila leaned forward, eyes wide, voice trembling slightly but laced with urgency. "This will fix everything. she whispered to Richard, her hand brushing his in an attempt to reassure, to compel. Trust me. Her gaze darted toward me as if seeking my approval, unaware that the approval she sought was already determined. I observed them both from across the table, a quiet sentinel. No expression betrayed my thoughts. My hands rested lightly on the documents, my posture calm, detached. There was no anger, no triumph, no impatience, only patience, honed over years of preparation. Every glance, every word from Mila, every hesitation from Richard was catalogued, noted, and allowed to play out exactly as I had foreseen. Richard's fingers hovered over the first signature line, his pride and caution warring with Mila's insistence. She urged him again, softer this time, almost pleading. It's the only way, she said, her tone convincing even to a careful observer. I remained still, a silent shadow, allowing the tension to peak naturally. The drama unfolded without interference, the trap poised for completion. Finally, the pens touched paper. Richard signed, and Mila followed, their combined actions finalizing the arrangement they believed would save them. There was no hesitation now, no further negotiation. Each signature carried authority, ownership, and consequence, all invisibly shifted toward me. The legal machinery was exact, irreversible, and complete. I leaned slightly forward, a soft, almost imperceptible smile crossing my face. Not a smile of gloating, but of acknowledgement. The plan I had spent years orchestrating had reached its first undeniable milestone. Quietly, I gathered my things, the soft rustle of paper and fabric the only sound accompanying my departure. Stepping outside, the rain had begun to fall, cool droplets soaking the ground and washing the world in muted silver. The air smelled of earth and renewal, and I walked calmly through the evening drizzle, leaving the Quinns in the house they thought was under their control. There was no confrontation, no revelation, only the silent, irreversible truth. By morning, everything was official. The Quinn estate, the family business, and all associated accounts had been legally transferred to Elise Hart. Not a single misstep, not a hint of suspicion, had interrupted the process. The world they had clung to, the legacy they had sought to protect, had quietly shifted, and they were none the wiser. I stood later that morning, watching from a distance as the first rays of sunlight hit the estate. The documents, the contracts, the ownership, all legally aligned with a reality they could not yet comprehend. The work was done with precision, with patience, and with a calculated calm. And in that stillness, I understood fully. This was not revenge in its loudest form. It was strategy realized, a quiet culmination of years spent preparing, waiting, and moving unseen. The signature night was over, but the impact of that single act would echo far beyond the rain-soaked evening. The morning after the signatures, the Quinns awoke to confusion that quickly turned to panic. Mila first noticed the accounts. Transfers blocked, balances erased, access denied. Her phone calls to bankers and advisors were met with procedural delays and bureaucratic stonewalling. Every attempt to reclaim what they thought was theirs only confirmed the harsh reality. Control had shifted irrevocably. Richard, rigid as ever, paced through his study, reviewing statements and contracts with disbelief etched across his face. Pride, that unwavering armor, offered little comfort against the weight of sudden impotence. Properties once meticulously maintained, offices once bustling with employees loyal to the Quinn name, now appeared beyond reach. Ownership had quietly passed into another set of hands they hadn't even recognized. Desperation drove Mila to contact Clayton Rhodes, the attorney who had once guided the family's legal maneuvers with seeming competence. The call, however, delivered yet another shock. Rhodes was under federal investigation, his firm frozen under the scrutiny of authorities, and the anonymous report that triggered it left him powerless to intervene. He had no ability to shield the Quinns or reverse the transfers. Mila's pleas, once confident and commanding, faltered with every revelation. Clinging to the last threads of hope, she made her way to my former home, the place where I had built a life they believed I had abandoned. The driveway was familiar, yet the atmosphere was entirely alien. She rang the bell, calling my name, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. The response she received shattered whatever expectations she harbored. Elise Hart LLC, the entity she had never known, held title to the property. The mailbox, the sign near the gate, the official deeds, all bore the name she had never suspected. Shock rendered her momentarily motionless, the weight of reality crashing down. Richard arrived soon after, drawn by her frantic messages, only to witness the same revelation. Every attempt to negotiate, to reason, to assert authority was met with silence, procedural barriers, and the stark fact that they were now outsiders in what they once considered their world. Mila's face paled, the composure she had relied upon for years dissolving in the grip of helplessness. Richard's hands shook slightly as he reviewed documents. The authority he had wielded for decades reduced to impotent gestures. The estate, the accounts, the business, all had transitioned without confrontation, without force, and without warning. The realization hit like a storm. For years, they had believed I had vanished, a retreat into obscurity. Yet, the truth was far more unsettling. Disappearance had been transformation. I had returned not as the daughter or sister they underestimated, but as someone entirely beyond their comprehension. Every action, every calculated move, had rendered them powerless, and the world they had thought secure was now unmistakably mine. In that moment, the Quinns understood the full scope of what had transpired. There would be no immediate confrontation, no instant recovery. The quiet, relentless precision of my planning had delivered them into a reality they could neither control nor reverse. And as they processed the magnitude of their loss, the truth became impossible to ignore. I had never fled. I had evolved. The office door opened before I could notice. Richard's familiar voice broke the quiet hum of my firm, sharp with urgency. He had traced my location through fragments of business filing, whispers in the industry, and the faint trail I left for the careful observer. I remained seated behind my desk, reviewing plans, unaware that he had arrived, and entirely unprepared for the shock about to unfold on his face. He paused at the entrance, his eyes scanning the room. Recognition did not come immediately. The posture, the poise, the aura of command, they were foreign. Elise Hart, the woman he assumed was a stranger, moved with a certainty that made him hesitate. His gaze flickered over my features, the curve of my jaw, the calm in my eyes, searching for familiarity and finding none. Then the realization hit. His face slackened, disbelief and disbelief intermingling with a trace of fear. The man who had once demanded unquestioned obedience now stared at a version of me he could not control. Slowly, comprehension spread across his expression. This was no mere employee, no investor, no faceless executive. This was Laura, transformed, returned, and untouchable. I rose to greet him, my movements deliberate, controlled, every inch the embodiment of confidence honed over years of preparation. My voice, calm and steady, cut through the tension. "You taught me to fight for what's mine," I said, letting the weight of the statement settle. I finally listened. The impact of my words registered immediately. Richard's shoulders slumped slightly, the rigid pride he relied upon crumbling under the clarity of truth. For the first time in decades, he was at the mercy of someone whose life he had underestimated, whose resolve he had dismissed. Before he could respond, the office door burst open again. Mila appeared, her face streaked with tears, her voice frantic. "Please, help me," she cried, desperation breaking through the remnants of her former composure. She stumbled forward, reaching for a connection that no longer existed. I met her gaze directly, unflinching, the years of planning reflected in the steadiness of my eyes. My words were measured, deliberate, and final. "You wanted me to pay your debt," I said, letting each syllable land. "I just collected mine." She froze, the weight of that revelation anchoring her to the spot. Every plea, every manipulation, every expectation she had held on to now collapsed under the simple, undeniable truth. I was no longer the sibling she could control. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Richard sank into a chair, speechless, the authority he had wielded now powerless against the meticulous precision of the life I had built. Mila's sobs echoed in the space, a stark contrast to my calm, steady presence. I felt no triumph, only clarity, only the quiet affirmation that years of strategy, patience, and preparation had culminated in this exact moment. The confrontation ended not with chaos, but with understanding. I had returned unassailable, untouchable, and fully in control. The past, the debts, the betrayal, all settled in silence, clarity, and the undeniable assertion of what was mine. And as Richard and Mila processed the weight of their reality, I remained composed, the architect of my own life, and the executor of the justice I had long envisioned. Mila vanished within days. The frantic calls, desperate attempts to regain footing, and frantic entreaties for help turned into silence. She disappeared entirely, leaving behind the remnants of a life she had once flaunted. The glittering facade of wealth, status, and influence crumbled, replaced by the shadows of debt and panic. Her absence marked the complete unraveling of the world she had clung to, a collapse born from her own recklessness and the precision of my design. Richard endured in a quieter, slower decline. The health he once maintained with discipline faltered under stress, disappointment, and the reality of losing control over the life he had meticulously built. Offices emptied, accounts seized, and estates transferred left him stripped of authority. Each day, the pride that had carried him through decades became a burden heavier than any physical ailment, and the man who once demanded unwavering loyalty now found himself powerless against the consequences he had never anticipated. Curiosity and a need for closure drew me to my childhood home. The place, once a center of rules, expectations, and silent judgments, now stood vacant, awaiting auction. The air carried a stillness, the walls empty but echoing memories of every command, every glance, and every expectation imposed upon me. Walking through the halls, I felt neither joy nor malice, only a calculated calm. This visit was not about reclaiming property, it was about confronting history, the space where loyalty was demanded and betrayal had been forgiven too easily. I lingered in the living room, where family portraits once stared down with silent scrutiny. The furniture remained, yet the vibrancy was gone. Rooms felt hollowed, like time had drained the warmth from the walls. I moved toward the chair my father had favored, the one that had witnessed countless lessons, reprimands, and family arguments. Sitting there, I felt the weight of every action that had brought me here, the culmination of patience, planning, and silent observation. The silence was heavy, not with victory, but with reflection. Revenge had been exact, precise, and unyielding, yet its satisfaction was subtle, almost imperceptible. It was not the exhilaration of triumph over weakness, but the quiet understanding that justice, as I defined it, had been fulfilled. There was no celebration, no sense of conquest, only the cold serenity of equilibrium restored. I whispered softly, words meant only for myself, perhaps for the memory of my father who had taught me the meaning of loyalty. You taught me loyalty. You just forgot what it meant. The phrase lingered in the empty room, a quiet acknowledgement of the lessons learned and the balance finally achieved. For the first time, I felt complete detachment from the world I had left behind. The estate, the memories, and the figures of my past no longer held sway over me. I had returned, acted, and left consequences in place. The collapse around me was not a source of celebration, but a testament to the precision of strategy and the peace that comes with reclaiming agency over one's own life. As I stood to leave, the quiet of the empty house seemed less like absence and more like resolution. The past had been confronted, the debt of betrayal settled, and the calm after the storm settled deep within me, unshakable, unyielding, and quietly absolute. Months passed in a quiet rhythm, each day reinforcing the calm I had fought to achieve. The Quinn estate, once a symbol of entanglement and betrayal, no longer held sway over me. With deliberate care, I arranged its sale, ensuring that the transaction was orderly, discreet, and final. The proceeds were substantial, yet the purpose behind them mattered more than wealth. A portion of the funds went to a women's legal fund, a support network designed to aid those trapped in situations where family control suffocated freedom. It was a quiet justice, a way to extend the lessons of my own journey to others still struggling in silence. I reclaimed my birth name, Lara Quinn, restoring the identity I had set aside for survival, yet I maintained the privacy I had cultivated as Elise Hart. Public exposure was unnecessary. The transformation had been inward as much as outward, a rebirth that required no audience. To the world, I was present, engaged, and successful, yet untouchable. The balance of visibility and discretion became a personal fortress, safeguarding my autonomy while leaving my past exactly where it belonged, behind me. One evening, the house, now largely empty and echoing with memories, became the stage for a final act of closure. I gathered the old family photograph, the one that had captured smiles, discipline, and expectations, and placed it carefully into the fireplace. Flames licked the edges, and I watched as the image of a family that had tried to define me dissolved into smoke and ash. The act was symbolic, a cleansing of history, grievances, and attachments that had once bound me. As the ashes spiraled upward, carried by the gentle drafts of the chimney, I felt a sense of release. It was subtle, not loud or exultant, but profoundly satisfying. There was no desire for celebration, no need for recognition. The past had been reconciled through strategy, patience, and deliberate action, and now it could rest. I allowed a soft smile to form, a recognition that I was finally free from the weight of expectation, manipulation, and obligation. The night outside was calm, rain-soaked streets glistening under muted lights. I stood by the window for a moment, observing the world moving forward as it always did, indifferent to the dramas of a single family. I understood fully that my disappearance had never been about evading consequence. It had been about transformation. In leaving, I had claimed a space where I could operate beyond reach, beyond control, beyond interference. I had become untouchable. The journey that began with betrayal, debt, and family pressure had ended not with vengeance, but with autonomy. Every decision, every calculated step, every silent maneuver had led to this point, a life reclaimed, a past acknowledged, and a future secured. In the quiet of that evening, I let the weight of years settle into a calm certainty. The fire had consumed the symbols of manipulation, The legal fund carried forward the promise of justice, and my identity had returned to me, intact and sovereign. I did not smile with triumph. I smiled with release. I had disappeared to become untouchable, and in that untouchability, I had finally arrived. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from my family, or should I have tried to forgive them? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like mine.